There is no doubt that the Russians consider the decision by the Biden administration to allow the Ukrainians to use long-distance weapons provided by the U.S. to strike deep into Russian territory as a major escalation, not just in the war in Ukraine, but possibly also in the relations between the United States and Russia, and also between NATO and Russia as well. When we got in touch with the spokeswoman for Russia's foreign ministry, she said, look, Vladimir Putin already laid all of this out 3 weeks ago. And what the Russian president said back then is that he believes that these types of weapons, like, for instance, the U.S.-provided ATACMS surface-to-surface missiles, can only be used by the Ukrainians with the help of specialists from the countries that provide those weapons, in this case, obviously meaning the United States. And Vladimir Putin has said that he believes that strikes deep into Russian territory with these weapons therefore constitute a direct attack against Russia by the countries that provided those weapons, and Vladimir Putin believes also provided the expertise to use those weapons accurately against targets inside Russia. Now, the Russians went a long way to try and dissuade the Biden administration from making exactly the decision that it has now made. The Russians even changed the fundamental nuclear doctrine of this country. And the new thing that this nuclear doctrine now includes is if the Russian Federation is attacked by long-distance weapons from a non-nuclear country, like, for instance, Ukraine, with the help of a nuclear country, like, for instance, the United States, that the Russians could then trigger the nuclear weapons and the use of nuclear weapons on their part. So the Russians definitely saying that to them, the United States allowing the Ukrainians to use weapons provided by the United States to strike deep into Russian territory will be considered a major escalation. Fred Pleitkin, CNN, Moscow.
Joining me right now is CNN military analyst Colonel Cedric Layton. Colonel, great to see you. So first off, explain what these missiles are all about, this Army Tactical Missile System, or sometimes referred to as ATACMS. Talk to me about what they are, their capability, and why this is a potential turning point.
Yeah, Frederica, the MGM-140 ATACMS, as you mentioned, the Army Tactical Missile System, has a range of around 180 to 190 miles. And what it can do is it can attack things like ammunition depots, troop concentrations, logistical centers, all of those kinds of things that could resupply a front line. So what the purpose of this is, from the Biden administration standpoint, is to actually make it possible for the Ukrainians to prevent the Russians and the North Koreans from attacking the Ukrainian concentrations in Kursk, which is the territory of Russia that Ukraine has occupied since August. So these missiles are designed to go in and to take out those kinds of things, like those logistics installations that I described. And they're designed to do this in a very efficient, very lethal manner. And it's one of the most lethal weapons that the U.S. has in its arsenal. And if the Ukrainians can use it the same way that the U.S. would use it in a similar situation, then it could very much change the way in which the war is being fought right now.
So would there be conditions attached? Might the U.S. have said, okay, we give the green light to use these, but they do have to be logistical locations, like you just mentioned, logistical Russian targets. Would there be any further guidance from the U.S. on how and what the conditions are in which to use these?
Yeah, I'm certain there is further guidance from the Biden administration to the Ukrainians on this. What they will probably say is that you can only attack those installations that are supplying the war effort against you in Ukraine or in Kursk in this particular instance. So the idea would be, Frederica, that they would go in and they would give them a list of targets that they can hit. The Ukrainians would perhaps provide a list of targets that they would like to hit, and then they would say, yes, you can use these weapons to hit those targets, or no, you can't hit those targets. One thing that would definitely be off the list would be nuclear installations or anything that would affect the strategic warfighting capability of Russia. That would most likely be off the list at this point in time.
And then how much of this is also in response to North Korean troops being in Russia and potentially assisting in this war in Ukraine?
A lot of it has to do with the fact that the North Koreans are in Russia doing this and providing support to the Russians and probably joining them in a military sense. So what the Biden administration is signaling is that that kind of addition to the Russian war machine is unacceptable to us. We don't want foreign troops coming into Russia, supporting the Russian war effort. And the North Koreans are the first ones to do this overtly, at least. And the signal to the North Koreans, as well as the Chinese, is not to support the Russian war effort, at least not that overtly.
What are the potential repercussions if North Korean troops are also taken out along with Russian troops, even though the targets, as you said, would be logistical targets? Consequently, there might be also personnel might be involved or taken out. What would be the potential consequences here?
The potential consequences could be somewhat far-reaching. It's possible that the North Koreans could react against South Korea, for example, or against U.S. troops in South Korea. So this is definitely a possibility that I'm sure the Biden administration has considered, and I would suspect that they have also increased their defensive capabilities in South Korea as a result of this decision. So that's the kind of thing that could happen. It's also true that the Russians will probably try to respond one way or another. They may not do so in a direct way, one that we would notice right away. It could be a cyber attack, it could be sabotage. Those are the kinds of things that we could expect Russia to do. But we would hope that they would not escalate to a point of no return. This is the kind of thing that the Biden administration has sought to avoid until now, when it's become pretty clear that the Ukrainians are having difficulty not only in Kursk, but also on the Eastern Front in the Donbass region.
President Biden is on his way to the G20 summit. What might be the reaction coming from world leaders on this move?
Well, I think it would depend on which world leader you're talking to. Certainly, China would not be enthusiastic about this. The Russians are not enthusiastic about it for obvious reasons. But the Western European nations, the Koreans, the Japanese, they are probably quite okay with this. And certainly the Ukrainians are very happy that this has finally happened for them. They've been waiting for this kind of approval for a very long time, really since the start of the latest invasion back in February of 2022. And that is something that they have sought for a long time, because they believe, and I think rightly, that the ability to hit targets deep inside Russia is essential for them to be successful in their ability to not only keep Ukraine independent, but also to prosecute, obviously, their war effort.